We hear about marcellus shale in Pennsylvania all the time. What is its progress? Next on Behind the Headlines.
This is Behind the Headlines, with behind-the-scenes analysis on issues affecting Pennsylvanians, sponsored by the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy. Now, here's your host.
Hi, welcome to a new edition of Behind the Headlines. I'm Charlie Greenwald, Senior Fellow of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy, and I'm joined as usual by my co-host Mara Donnelly. Mara, welcome.
Hello, Charlie.
Hi. Well, the campaign is advancing.
It is.
And we wonder if where Pennsylvania is going to fall this particular time. There's some discussion that it will be competitive and some that it will not be. What do you think? Is it going to be competitive?
As we sit here today, we're being ignored a little bit. So I think maybe we're not viewed as very competitive. But there's still time for that to change. Okay. Hard to say.
Well, we want to have we have a guest with us today who knows about competition and who knows about the real world of business and the real world of energy. And of course, energy has become a major component of Pennsylvania's economy and will be for the foreseeable future, as is true has been true in the past. A different source of energy, though. We're happy to have with us today Tom Shepstone, who is the campaign director for Energy in Depth, the Northeast Marcellus Shale Initiative. Now, that's quite a mouthful, Tom. Could you please tell us what the Marcellus Initiative is and your responsibilities, your background in it? And by the way, it's so nice to have you on board.
It's great to be here.
Thank you for being here.
Yeah, the Energy in Depth, first of all, is a nationwide program designed to promote shale gas development, and it was launched by the Independent Petroleum Association of America, and they are a trade association of trade associations. They essentially represent the various trade associations in different states. And they decided about 3 years ago they needed to have a more aggressive effort to promote shale gas development and respond to some of the nonsense that was out there being promoted against it. And so they created Energy in Depth, which is a Washington-based organization that is educational in nature and designed to make sure that all issues are responded to in an aggressive way and that everybody gets the real facts. In 2011, I was approached by Energy in Depth. I was and am a consultant. I do a lot of work with companies and communities and doing planning and research and that kind of thing, and I had been very involved in the gas issue myself as a landowner, and I was approached by them in 2011 to help establish their first grassroots effort. And so we launched a program in northeastern Pennsylvania and what we refer to as the southern tier of New York. It's 21 counties, 10 in Pennsylvania and 11 in New York, where we go out and we do a combination of things. One is we run a positive campaign for natural gas development. We also do rapid response to, again, the nonsense that's out there, because we have within our region a number of entities and interests who are opposed to natural gas developments. Some in the Delaware Valley and the Delaware River Basin Commission area. That's where Gasland, which maybe some of you have heard of, was born, is in that area. In fact, Josh Fox, the director of that movie, says he grew up about 4 miles from where I grew up, but I don't remember. But we also have Ithaca, New York, which is in our region, and that's another hotbed of anti-activity. So we are aggressively responding to that kind of activity. We're also working very closely with landowners, which is really critical, because landowners are the heart and soul of Pennsylvania's rural economy. Those are the people that control what happens on that land, whether it be farming, whether it be natural resource production, or whether it be something else. And so those landowners know how important this is to them. Rural America is suffering. Rural Pennsylvania, rural New York, upstate New York. All these areas are suffering greatly because they do not have strong economies. They know how important natural gas development is. So we work with them to make this a reality and make it happen. That's a good part of what we do.
Well, one of the biggest pieces of nonsense, to use your word, that we keep hearing about is the impact that Marcellus shale drilling has on water.
Yes.
And the environmentalists are very much opposed to the drilling because they're fearful of the impact it's going to have.
Yes.
So here's your opportunity.
Okay, I'm happy to take it. There are two parts to that. First of all, there's a concern about pollution, obviously, a contamination of groundwater or surface water. There's also a concern about the quantity of water used. We've heard both of those things raised numerous times. Let's deal with them one at a time. From the groundwater standpoint, there is not a single case, not a single one, in 60 years of doing this in the United States of America, there is not a single case of hydraulic fracturing polluting a water supply. Not a single one. And that has been confirmed by no less an authority than Lisa Jackson, who is the director of the Environmental Protection Agency, as well as about 23 or 4 states that have regulated this stuff and have all issued similar statements that they have had no such experience, including John Hanger, Pennsylvania's last Secretary of Environmental Protection. And of course its current Secretary of Environmental Protection, Mike Krancer. So we have that on good authority. We also know from studies done by the Groundwater Protection Council and a number of other sources that the record is very, very good in that regard. What happens is you get a lot of people who use the word fracking, which is slang for hydraulic fracturing, to encompass the entire industry. And so when they say fracking is causing this or that problem, they're often referring to something that might happen with a erosion and sedimentation problem that can happen when you're building a house, so or doing anything. If you go out and plant a garden, you can create an erosion and sedimentation problem. So a lot of those issues with regard to surface water are just ordinary situations that you would have with any activity, and then people attach the word fracking to it to try to say, well, there's all this and that. There's also the methane migration issue, because in substantial parts of Pennsylvania we have shallow methane, which means that there's methane close to the surface, and when you stick anything into the ground, you provide potentially a channel for that methane to reach the surface. We've seen in Pennsylvania great progress in addressing that. Obviously a gas well, similar to a water well or anything else that you put in the ground, creates that potential. But the gas industry has done, I think, a terrific job on that. They have substantially upgraded their casing requirements. They have addressed a number of other mechanical issues, cementing issues, and those kind of things, to the point that that's really a very, very minimal problem at this point. I would not want to deny it, because it does occasionally happen, but it's very much minimized and very much under control. And I would point out in New York State, where they've had requirements similar to what Pennsylvania's had for many years, longer than Pennsylvania, they've had no such incidents in many, many years. So we know that the proper procedures work. It's just a matter of getting them done. The last issue about the quantity, one of the things people don't realize is how little that water really is. I mean, it's infinitesimally small. It sounds great, millions of gallons of water. But millions of gallons of water is not that much compared to what you use on a golf course, for example. The other thing that people don't realize is that when you burn or combust any fossil fuel, particularly natural gas, one of the products you get is water. And in fact, we return to the water cycle, the hydrologic cycle, we ultimately return more water than we use. Now, it may not be returned exactly the same spot, but it gets returned to the cycle. And a lot of people don't realize that. If you look at a tailpipe on a car and you see it dripping water, that's not gas or oil that's dripping, that's water. And that's because when you combust any fossil fuel, the carbon and the hydrogen separate, and the hydrogen mixes with oxygen and produces water. So that's what happens. So really, the water issues, we're hearing less and less and less about that. I mean, we deal with this stuff all the time, and we think we've won that battle.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Well, we started the segment with a note on the importance that Marcellus Shale has been gaining in the energy picture and in the economic picture for the Commonwealth as a whole, Tom. Could you tell us a little bit about some of the economic contributions that the Marcellus Shale industry has made to the Commonwealth?
Yes. You and I talked a little bit before the program about an article I had written for the Patriot News, where we articulated a number of those things, including the 2% of the economy that's 2% of the jobs in Pennsylvania that relate to Marcellus Shale, a couple 100,000 jobs. I like to bring it down to the local level, though, in two respects. One is if we go to Bradford and Susquehanna counties, which is near where I come from, in northeastern Pennsylvania, there were 3,600 jobs created in the first 3 years of the Marcellus shale activity. That's a huge number of jobs for a rural county, and that's tangible. That's not some speculation about, you know, Pennsylvania that everybody will challenge this way and that way. These are tangible new jobs in a localized area, 3,600 jobs. And we know also from a tangible perspective that Bradford County has consistently the lowest unemployment rate of any county in the Commonwealth for several months, several years now actually. There has been no economic recession in Bradford and Susquehanna counties. There's the test. We can throw all the numbers around, and we're good at throwing numbers too, but you can throw all the numbers around you want, but the fact is, if you go and see it with your own eyes, you know there's no economic recession in Bradford and Susquehanna counties. That's just the truth of it. The same thing in Lycoming County, where Williamsport is located. One of the things we mentioned in this article, as well as several others, is the fact that Williamsport last year was the 7th fastest growing metro area in the United States out of 360-some metro areas.
That's remarkable when you look at Williamsport just a decade ago.
It is essentially a Rust Belt city, you know, a little mini Rust Belt, you know, and with declining manufacturing and all kinds of problems that you could see. I remember we bought a horse trailer about 10 years ago, and I had to go into Williamsport to get the darn thing, and I thought, gee, I don't know, this is not so comfortable here, you know. And now you go there, the place is alive. It's got a number of nice restaurants. There's busyness. There's just a vitality. And they have a new Marcellus Energy Park, which is a couple hundred acres that is practically sold out. It just opened. It's practically sold out. All kinds of new jobs that are totally related to Marcellus shale industry. So. And one of the other things I would like to point out is the Patriot News article gave some job numbers, and we had some people poking at us later and saying, well, yeah, but you didn't consider this or that. One of the things that's not in those numbers is all the ancillary activity, all the, for example, lawyers. You know, those aren't considered ancillary jobs related to Marcellus shale, but I can tell you, lawyers, including the ones that sue us, get a lot of...
They're making some money.
They're making some money, right. But if you go into the courthouse in any of these counties, you'll see a tremendous number of legal people and legal assistants and title researchers doing work. That's all activity that doesn't count as ancillary, and it's additional jobs. And you go to the Subway shop and there's a line. You know, I mean, this is the kind of stuff that you see with your own eyes when you go to these places.
Do you envision a day when Marcellus shale is embraced completely?
I don't know. I don't know as any industry has ever embraced completely. I'm sure there's, you know, people still complaining about industries we've had for, you know, for centuries probably. But the fact is, we see a lessening of opposition. I think there are three types of people. You have people who know something about this industry or have something to gain, who are for it. You have a second group on the other end of the spectrum who are just absolutely opposed because they're ideologically driven and they don't want to hear anything that contradicts their opinion. And then you have a middle group that is just a little bit unsure. And we're finding that middle group shrinking a lot. We're finding that the opposition is pretty well confined to that far end of the spectrum that's just ideologically opposed.
They're opposed to all fossil fuels, regardless of where the origin of them.
They're opposed to all development. They're opposed to all development, and that becomes clear when we engage them that they're not just opposed to fossil fuels. They're opposed to all development.
Okay. Well, we want to thank you very much for giving us a quick snap shot of what's going on in the Marcellus shale industry, and we look forward to having you back and
love to do it.
Watching developments in the industry. Okay, Tom?
Great.
All right. Thanks so much for being
nice
with
to
us.
be here.
Thanks very much.
Stay tuned for the second segment of Behind the Headlines. Don't forget to look us up at Susquehanna Valley Center's website and on YouTube, and you can find all our shows archived on voiceofpa.net. We'll be right back after this.
Behind the Headlines is brought to you as a public service by the Pennsylvania Business Council, envisioning a commonwealth in which residents enjoy a very high quality of life in sustainable communities. The Council works aggressively to define key long-term policy strategies and solutions that make the Commonwealth more competitive, creating and sustaining a better Pennsylvania. Additional underwriting provided by the Worrell Corporation Foundation, based in Carlisle, Pennsylvania, by the Edward H. and Jeannie Arnold Foundation, and by the Hospital and Health System Association of Pennsylvania, helping hospitals to provide healing, health, and hope to communities across the state. And by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business. Behind the Headlines is also supported as a public service by Daily Underwriters of America, a better way for truck insurance. And by Penn Waste, your best local choice for your waste removal and recycling needs.
Penn Waste is proud to be a locally owned business. Since the company's founding in 2000, it has employed many of its neighbors as members of a dedicated team of professionals. Penn Waste is proud of its many contributions to the people of its service area through support of numerous community organizations such as Christmas Addicts and the Junior League of York. One more way they improve the quality of life where they live and work.
Welcome back to the second segment of Behind the Headlines. It's back to school time here in Pennsylvania, and so we're going to spend some time talking about education. With us here today is Dave Patti, who is the President and CEO of the Pennsylvania Business Council. Welcome, Dave.
Thanks. Great to be back.
The Business Council has been interested in education issues for as far back as I can remember. We tend to have you on to talk about business issues. So why are we talking about education today?
Well, first, business and education are often highly related.
Yeah.
And you're right, even when we were the Business Roundtable, going back nearly 40 years now, this organization across different governors has always played a key role in trying to talk about education from early education up through and including college and other parts of workforce development and training that extend beyond traditional schools. But truly there's no way to get a product or a service out the door without a well-qualified workforce, and that starts with a fundamental K through 12, kindergarten through 12th grade education, and then post-secondary education, college, whether it be the 2-year, 4-year graduate school, and also other types of job training. So it was really important to the business community that we have a good education system.
Well, I know that the Business Council is heavily involved in what is called the Common Core State Standards. Can you give us a little bit of background about what that's all about?
Sure. And while Common Core is a new phrase, frankly, in education, every couple of years we change the names whether we need to or not. It's an important new development, but it didn't come out of whole cloth. In our lineage, we had been working, even just go back to the Casey administration, on outcomes-based education. The Ridge administration picked that up and did some good things in standards. That was picked up by the Rendell administration, which moved into Keystone exams to test are people learning to those standards. And then, of course, they had also gotten involved in early childhood education, and our organization had been involved with that. But now in the Corbett administration, we've moved to Common Core. And this is a state-driven initiative to try and provide more rigor, more complexity to what students are learning, to prepare them really of a kind of a liberal arts mentality and a back to the basics mentality, starting with English language arts and mathematics, moving eventually into science, social sciences and history, especially American history, and technology, other areas that they should know. But really starting with those basics of what are your language skills, your reading and writing ability, and what are your math abilities? Well, wow, we're back to the 3 R's.
Yeah.
So while Common Core is new in terms of the phraseology, I don't know that it's all wholly new in concept, but it's let's have basic standards that apply across the country. But each state that decides to do this, some 46 now have signed on. Each state does so voluntarily.
Now, you did say it's state initiative driven, but it really is a national effort here.
It's a national effort, but really a federated effort. National Governors Association and the Council of Chief School Officers had partnered in this initially and have been doing a lot of work on it. But then each state does their own thing. Now, there was a recognition that a lot of states already, as I talked about with Pennsylvania, already had standards. So what Pennsylvania did, and our state Board of Education last summer, was to look at, well, gee, here's what we have in Pennsylvania. Here's how it differs from that model, that national model.
Okay.
Here are things we think they're right. They're more rigorous, more complex, more engaged, more integrated with other knowledge than we are. We'll adopt that. Hey, here's some areas we think they, frankly, could have gone a step higher, or we already are there. We like where we are. It fits college and career readiness, which is really the overall goal of this, is to have students college and career ready. We think we're better off in Pennsylvania. So what we adopted in Pennsylvania was an adaptation of the national model called the Pennsylvania Common Core.
Okay.
And that's fine. Each state is welcome to do that.
Well, you talked a little bit about goals, but what are the overall objectives of these standards?
It's part of the whole, really, for the last 20 years in education, we've been trying to induce more accountability. You know, in Pennsylvania, we even have the accountability block grants. And this is a continuation of that effort to make sure that all students have a core level of knowledge, that's a rigorous level of knowledge, that they can integrate that knowledge with other areas. And in terms of language arts, for instance, that they're not just reading fiction. You know, they should read the classics, but really the classics, but also technical documents and documents of American history, and understand those documents, be able to process that, and then be able to write with a level of complexity as well. C-spot run is fine, but we need to get beyond that. And you know, a lot of the reading that a lot of Americans do, frankly, not just our students, is kind of light. So this is to get back to, you know, the great books. There's not a reading list written into the Common Core. Each state will come up with that on their own. But let's get to more difficult text, and from that you'll get your language skills. You'll get the vocabulary.
Right.
And now let's also learn to write about it, because when we're writing for our profession, we're writing in very technical ways. You know that from law school.
Absolutely.
First thing they start to do is to teach you to write. You know, because they don't feel that the students are coming into law school, even though they have a 4-year degree, are necessarily ready to write at that level of intensity and complexity and rigor, and to write persuasively, which is something that certainly we need to do. In mathematics, it's the same kind of thing. Complaint that American mathematics right now in our schools has become a mile wide and an inch deep. You know, the kids are exposed to all kinds of things rapidly, but they still know how to add. And then finally, the other part of this is the assessments. That you know, here's a novel idea. If presented with a problem 10 minus x equals 3, a student not only in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania should know it's 7, right? But also in Buffalo, New York, or in Little Rock, or in LA, or in Philadelphia. Hey, the answer is the answer. This is not how do you feel about it. This is let's get it right. And let's assess that. Let's have that accountability.
Well, it seems that every time there's a change in these educational standards for the students, that it becomes a lightning rod issue, and that there are both sides of the issue. Politically, there's union problems. How does this one shake out? Is there support? Is there opposition? What's the landscape for this, for the Common Core standards?
You're right, and as America has become so politicized on all areas of public policy, you know, you have that's from the left or that's from the right, or this is for labor, this is pro-business. And the Common Core, for the most part, has been able to bypass that. There have been, you know, because there's so many governors. Well, you get a Tim Pawlenty and a Jeb Bush, you know, right next to well-known Democrat governors, or Martin O'Malley or others, who are staunch advocates. And I think to the degree that it's been driven by governors, that has helped. Now, having said that, I wouldn't say there's none of that. And we've seen that actually much more recently in just the last month or two. In part, the Obama administration embraced Common Core and said, well, we're going to try and even push states farther. So they had a race to the top where you would get oodles of federal money, for 5 states who said that they would implement these faster than anybody else and become a model. By doing so, that scared some people in the conservative and Republican camps to say, oh, President Obama is trying to nationalize this. He's going to try and use this as a tool. And in fact, people who were just getting to know about Common Core leapt to the conclusion he must have invented it. So I want to look at the president and say, you didn't build this.
Right.
And it did come up during both conventions, in fact, where there were some conservatives in Tampa who wanted to make sure that Governor Romney, who of course is a governor, had ample knowledge of this and support for it. Doesn't go too far on a nationalized system. And of course, in the Charlotte, North Carolina event for the DNC, those people who were sort of taking credit for it. The fact of the matter is, it has relationships to the Bush administration and No Child Left Behind. It has relationships to the Obama administration and some of the things that Secretary Duncan has done, but it is independent of both. It takes the best of all of that, and the best of what comes from the states, and tries to drive down the middle to say, let's just make sure our students are learning.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned that Pennsylvania has its own set of standards, and that they've looked at the Common Core standards and tweaked our own standards. Mm-hmm. Does that mean we're part of this national effort here?
Yeah, because this is not the federal government saying, here's a mandate.
Okay.
You know, or any other third party saying, here's a mandate. You know, at the end of the day, it's a guideline. Can
they piecemeal it, or was the preference be that you adopt the whole thing?
Well, there's a preference that, in fact, you know, I mean, even nationally, there's really only, you know, the standards are only out there, these model standards, if you will, are only out there for 2 areas so far, 2 of the 5. So they're kind of piecemeal, they're phasing it in. And they'd like to see people start to phase that in 215. The national assessments, there's in fact 2 different efforts there. 2 consortiums. It's almost like building a fighter plane, you know, where 3 or 4 defense contractors join one team and 3 or 4 join another team, and they both try and build the fighter to see who comes up with the best. In this case, we're actually buying both fighters.
I understand you've done some polling on this issue of Pennsylvanians. What does the general Pennsylvania feel about this?
We did, because we wanted to start a communications project around. We know how our CEOs feel about it, and they feel very, very good about it. But we want to know how average Pennsylvanians, and frankly, if we're going to talk to the media, talk to lawmakers, talk to Governor Corbett about this, it's helpful to know that. I'll refer to some notes here just so I get the numbers right. But what was interesting to me was how high the support was. And we kind of start with trying to also understand, how do people think about education today? You know, when we ask people about Congress, they hate Congress, but then they love their congressman.
Right.
We asked the same kind of question here. What do you think about the education system in Pennsylvania? What do you think about your school district? Well, we asked them to give an A, B, C, D. An F, and it was a bell curve. Small percentage of A, small percentage of failed. You know, largely C's.
Okay.
For the system, what surprised us was not much movement about their own school district. Pretty much the same numbers. They only feel slightly better about their own school than they do about the system. That's a big change in that Congress model, if you will. So I guess the good news is we've convinced everybody after 10 years of complaining about education that's bad. Now the bad news is we have to tell people there's a solution.
Right.
But when we ask people about should it be more rigorous, you know, 84% of the Pennsylvania surveyed, 600 people surveyed by the Terrence Group in Washington D.C. on live phone calls, 84% said it should be more rigorous. 70% supported, or let me move to 83%. said the same standard should be in every one of our 500 school districts, and 74% said every kid in Pennsylvania schools should take the same exam.
Wow!
So that's overwhelming. I mean, if you're up in the 70s and 80s percentages in polling, you know, that's pretty amazing. Now, not surprisingly, only 20% had ever heard of Common Core, but when we explained the concept, 68% said sign me up. And
you're not going to believe this, but we have to bring this to an end already. So clearly, we're going to have lots more conversations about this. Very quickly, what is the website address for?
We're creating a website for everybody to learn about this. Okay. So pa-commoncorestandards.com, and we'll have a repository for all kinds of information. That site will be up very, very soon. And you'll come back and talk to us more about this? I'd love to do so. Okay, thank you. Thank you for being with us today. We'll see you next time on a new edition of Behind the Headlines.